Hi there, welcome along to Outdoor Gear Chat. This is episode 70. What a milestone that is for us. And amazing that we're here to talk about the Everest 50th anniversary. This is part two in our podcast of our series of those. I'm joined as always by Cathy. Hi.
Hi Wayne, I am Cathy and I'm the co-owner and director of the Joe Brown shops in Snowdonia and the Climber shop in Ambleside. And as I mentioned before, back in episode 13, we talked about the history of the shops that are absolutely founded. The Climber shop opened in 1959, the Brown shops opened in 1966. So they've been selling technical equipment to everybody from folks going out enjoying their hill walking right through to expeditions, all through that time frame. So I'm actually delighted to have with us today a guest who is an author, a historian, climber, skier and runner, and who ran the family business Karrimor, who not only our shops have been selling for many years, but Karrimor was a key supplier of the Everest 75 expedition. And our guest worked designing and building bespoke equipment, and also later in his career was key to recreating the clothing worn by Mallory on one of the very, very early Everest expeditions. So welcome, Mike Parsons.
Thank you.
Hi there, Mike. Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? I am fascinated by the whole tale, but particularly the recreation of the Mallory bit is just absolutely astounding. Would you humour me, Cathy? Can we start with that bit first?
Messing with my question.
Or is it gonna spoil all the flow?
It's better to come later.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah, go on then. Sorry.
The maestro has spoken.
I know. I'm happy with that. I know. I am just. I remember seeing something about it. It was absolutely incredible. Anyway, but yeah. I mean, sorry, Cathy. I've spoilt the flow now, haven't I? Already this early on in the chat.
Not at all, because
more editing to do.
Yeah.
Literally from the early days, from those 1930s expeditions through to 1953, which was obviously the big expedition where Tenzing and Hillary stood on the summit of the highest peak in the world for the first time. And that pivotal expedition was announced on Coronation Day back here in the UK, which was a hugely important day and a hugely important announcement. And I think it's obviously one of those moments in time where if you were there, you remember where you were and what was happening. And Mike, I do know that you were there in 1953 to hear that sort of momentous news of the first climb of Everest. But where were you and what did it mean to you?
Well, I was 11 years old and I was camping on the side of Windermere at Felfoot.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, how awesome.
The weather was awful. It was blowing the tent around and it was raining and gusting. We were out checking the pegs to make sure they weren't pulling out and so on. And my dad had his so-called mobile radio, which was the size of 2 bricks, held up here, and the aerial was extended and touching the top of the tent, and the radio was crackling away, and he was listening to the broadcast of the coronation. Suddenly, one arm shot up in the air, and he said, "Hey, they've climbed Mount Everest." And it's very curious. I find it curious that my thoughts were, even at 11 years old, I could see that the British Empire was fading rapidly. Fading. It's amazing that I would think of that at 11 years old. And I wondered if this was some sort of revival. It wasn't, but it meant a huge amount for climbing and mountaineering.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, isn't it? And like I think Cathy, you were saying that on an earlier podcast about the or it might have been a chat that we were having, but the timing of it and that it was kept secret, and
Oh,
how all that worked to make sure it was
yeah,
reported and the
yeah.
news didn't get out. So it's fascinating
Right.
hearing that.
It was
That,
so
that
important, and there's a book written called Coronation Everest by a lady called Jan Morris, and she was responsible. I think it was Sunday Times that
She was
she was
there.
working at,
broke it.
and
Yeah, wow.
yeah, so she was responsible for breaking that news and the security around breaking that news. And I remember coming across the book and thinking, that's strange. I don't remember any women on that
Trans, yeah.
Everest trip. Yeah, and of course
Nice, yeah.
Jan Morris has got an incredible story herself, because she was James Morris when she broke the news, and in the 70s went through a whole sex change, and she's written another fantastic book describing that process. Look her up, Jan Morris. She's an
Yeah,
absolute
wow.
legend. Unfortunately, she passed away just last year, I think, but she's a prolific writer, and oh yeah, really, 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 really interesting. But we digress.
I know. I'm sorry,
To
Mike.
just look at that as I look back now, because I'm writing my memoir, I could see that there were two pivotal happenings, and one was the Everest, but some years prior to that was the founding of the BMC. Now that might not sound pivotal to you, but it was very pivotal because of the nature of our society. Because historically, Britain's society is very structured, hierarchical, and climbing was related to the upper classes, as only they could have the time to go out to the Alps.
Yeah.
And I was listening. Every other country in Europe opened up after the founding of the Alpine Club in 1857. Every other alpine country in Europe, opened up an alpine organization, which was open to everybody.
Right.
But we remained very, very hierarchically structured. You had to be either a gentleman or a hell of a bloody good climber to enter this elite part of society. That's how society worked. So the BMC was founded in 46, and that was really, really super important because they published a book called Climbing in Britain, and it was the first instructional book, not the first guidebook, the first instructional book, yeah, telling you how to climb. And that sold, wait for the number, 125,000 copies.
Wow.
No way.
And that was sold to the men returning from the war in 46, yeah?
Right.
And that provided a foundation of people who were jumping into climbing.
Yeah, and a boom. Yeah, loads of fit, active people coming. Well, soldiers. Yeah, airmen, I suppose that would want to do that sort of thing as a pastime.
Yeah, but something else happened that was critically important for our family business. You see, we had a bike shop in East Lancashire.
Right.
And the bike shop was selling bikes, of course. But we also had a little workshop above the shop selling bike bags, which my dad had named Karrimor. And initially it was set up in my dad was a racing cyclist. He set up and he held the local record for Rawtenstall to Blackpool, which was about 45, 50 miles or something.
Right.
And he set up a bike shop in the start of the Great Recession because the cotton mills were in trouble in that period. But as the war came along, then only essential articles were manufactured. So consumer goods were not made at all. And so therefore he had the idea, he bought a couple of sewing machines and persuaded my mum and aunt to make some bags simply to sell in the store because there was nothing to sell. And this was their livelihood, yeah?
Yeah.
However, he was working very, very hard and very late, and he had an accident. And he splashed spirits of salt in his eyes. And my mum nagged him, but he still didn't go and have it sorted for some while. And he then, he did go to Moorfields Eye Hospital, which is still a leading eye hospital in Britain and in the world. And they operated. But at that moment, a German bombing raid came across, the sirens rang out, and they had to move him. And after an eye operation, you have to be kept very still.
I remain still, yeah.
Right.
And after they pulled him back, they said, "Sorry, Mr. Parsons, we have lost it." So he didn't finally lose his sight until quite a few years later, but it was step by step by step, gradually getting worse. And I did one last ride with him on the bike before he finally lost his sight. And then years later, we started riding tandem and went, and I did a lot of riding tandem front with him.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did that? How did that impact upon the work? Sorry, Mike. Sorry, we very excitedly have questions. I'm really sorry to disturb you, but there's so many things that we want. I guess running through my head as far as the tales are concerned. Did it stop him doing any of the work at all? Did your mum pick up on making the bags?
Well, my aunt became involved in the business as well, as I said. And it's so this, my dad's disability was, he was still a really good ideas man, always came up with ideas,
Right.
but also he was very frustrated because he was limited in what he could do. I left school in 1960, and I served. I worked a year in the bike store. Learned how to build a wheel and do the usual sort of maintenance jobs on a bike, and then we mutually agreed I would shift over to the manufacturing. But something I mentioned the BMC because the BMC and Everest and so on had a huge impact because Raleigh, we were a Raleigh bike dealer.
Right.
And Raleigh at that time was like BMW. It's a really important brand. But during the war period, Raleigh had, of course, not made any bikes. They had only been making shells. Right. Millions and millions. I have the original book of that, showing how many millions of shell cases that they made. Yeah.
Gosh.
And anyway, they opened, looking forward to the boom in bicycles. They opened a 28-acre factory, and my dad went to that in 1953. And Prince Philip opened that. And I remember my mum ticking him off because he'd been drinking a little bit. Anyway, 2 years later, they opened a second factory, 20 acres, can you imagine?
Gosh.
And my dad invited me to that, and I still recall it. However, at that point, shortly afterwards, the bike market completely collapsed for reasons of all people deserting bikes for two reasons. One, they were getting on the crags. Because I've given you the statistics of the amount of books sold by the BMC.
Of course.
Yeah.
But also there was a very strong sociological factor that if you were riding a bike, you were regarded as an impecunious bleeding peasant.
Right. Okay.
Very strong. And so
Yeah.
over the following years, there's a huge shift towards motorized transport, whether that be whether that be a motorbike or a car or whatever. And then motorways started to open.
Yeah.
And the national parks and long distance pathways started to open. So this was the whole thing. I don't remember all this, of course. I'm researching it for my memoir. so I'm able to give you a more complete, fully researched story. And so that's what the start of the BMC did. It helped crunch the bike business. So our shop and the manufacturing was severely under threat, with Dad losing his site, and the bike bag market and the bike market. So that's both the workshop and the bike bag and the bike shop were in a sort of precarious situation.
Yeah. And that, I suppose, I know 1960 to 1995 has sort of been termed as the golden age of equipment, or certainly for as far as outdoor equipment and technology is concerned. So obviously that all kind of sat on a knife edge, I suppose, the family business there, with what had happened to your dad, and the general sort of societal changes and everything. But I know 1958 was a key year, with the introduction of the Karrimor Sac de Grand-Peur and the Joe Brown pack in 1950. And I suppose those two styles almost heralded the beginning of Karrimor's dominance of the UK's rucksack market pretty much for 30 years, really. I mean, certainly when I started in the trade, Karrimor was a huge name, and that was heading into clothing as well at that point. But going back to the rucksacks, which were really important, how did you build on these styles and as the new technologies arrived, and customers' taste, I suppose, changing over that time? Because 30 years is a long period of time, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. First of all, a quick fun story about the label we used, Sac de Grand-Peur.
Yeah.
And what happened was, my dad said, look, we need a label for we'd had a couple of people ask for a slim. No climbing rucksacks were being made at that time, because the rucksacks were usually from Bergens or somebody like that in Norway, and they were framed and they were clumsy and they weren't suitable for climbing and so on. So a climbing rucksack was completely new. It didn't have a frame. It had was narrow. So there was room to get your arms back and so on, and very simple. So he said, "Look, we need a label and a name for the pack. We need something French, because the French seem to be leading there. You know, the French climbed Annapurna in 1950, so that was a really sort of grim story because of the amputations after frostbite.
Yeah.
So we need a French word. So being a bike rider,
Yeah.
my bike riding French came up with the word Grand-Peur, because I used to. The only way of getting news about overseas cycling at that time, it wasn't reported in the British press. No. And so I had to buy French magazines. And so the word for a sprinter was a poncheur, and the word for a climber was Grand-Peur.
So right.
The name was completely erroneous. It should have said Sac de Montagne or Sac de Montagnard or something like that. But curiously, not a single person over the years queried it. Oh, how fun.
I love that. That's brilliant. Yeah. There's just so much about that. That's fantastic, isn't it? I'm sorry, I was furiously Googling Grand-Peur as you were talking. So it just popped up at the right moment for me. That's
And
absolutely superb.
I've just been watching in the last few days the Giro d'Italia because I still follow cycling sport, because that was my first sport for many years. I was riding 10,000 miles a year for several years, So
Wow.
yeah, that's where I got my legs from.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway, back to the longer story. It's an interesting question. Yeah, we dominated the scene for 30 years. Yeah. Interesting question. Well, I gave a talk. I was invited by the Oread Climbing Club of Derby last November. And one of them turned out to be a former customer of mine. And so he was intrigued. And what surprised them also surprised me, because they thought I just sat in an office. And I didn't.
Oh.
And I could look, when I started, there was like 6 people. So when somebody went ill, or as frequently happened, people were not, changing the job and this, that, the other, I did that operation.
Yeah.
That's what I did. And just as an example, I want to show you. Only 3 or 4 years ago, I had a friend come to the climbing hut next door to us, which my wife Marion is the warden of. And he said, Mike, I've got this old rucksack and there's nothing wrong with it. It's still functional. And but I'm going to update it. But I thought you might like it. I said, oh, okay, let me have a look. And I looked and I said, good heavens, this must be late 60s. He said, yeah, I bought it in 68. And so I looked at it and
Wow.
I said, good heavens, do you know?
That's my stitch work.
You see that stitching there? That particular bit?
Fantastic.
I did that.
Brilliant. And sorry for those of you who aren't watching what Mike's just done. He's literally raised up a rucksack and shown us the stitching on it that you did in the 60s, Mike. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that I had no doubt that I did it, because there's only one machine that did that.
Right.
It was a very, very special machine, and no one else liked to use it. So I did all the operations on that thing.
Yeah.
So therefore, again, I go back to the Oread, and that surprised me. For me, manufacturing is getting involved. So I didn't make the patterns for the Joe Brown pack because my aunt had done that, but I learned from how they'd done that. And the next one was Don Willans arrived. I was upstairs cutting leather at the time. And Eric, the shop manager, who was my training partner, he was a national hill climb champion. He called up the stairs because there was no separate entrance to the workshop. It was just up the stairs through the shop. So they just called out, somebody to see you. And so I went downstairs, and there's this short, squat guy. Say hi. How do? I'm Don Willans. You might have heard of me. I come from. I live up the road near here, and you're making a pack for a mate of mine, Joe Brown. Can you make one for me? I said, yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Just tell us what you want. Because no strategy. That's what we did,
Mm.
And so, we were looking for things to make.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, literally, it was that bespoke. It was, we can make it for you, for want of a better phrase. Was that what you were doing back? You weren't churning out, for want of a better phrase, loads of the same sort of pack.
We made them available.
Yeah.
And as I say, I didn't do the patterns. My aunt did the patterns for the Joe Brown, the first version.
Yeah.
But there was something like 1, 2, 3, I think we did about 3 or 4 versions of the Joe Brown pack.
Yes, yeah.
We did a Joe Brown extendables, or somebody put one on LinkedIn on one of the social media the other day, and I wrote underneath it, "I made this pack."
I think that sort of is really key, though, to sort of going on to that sort of 30-year domination, because from the outset you had a clear understanding of what was involved in the manufacturing aspect of those items, but you're an active user as well, so you could go out and test them. And then as you sort of work through your career, I know over your career you work with some of the best climbers of their eras, listening to their feedback and translating that back into product and putting that product back out into the marketplace to become commercial. So I think that whole cycle, if you think that you as one person doing all of those roles versus, let's think about a larger corporation where there's a department that does the design. They may or may not speak to the department that sources the fabrics, and they may or may not speak to the department that deals with returns and knows what goes wrong, with products. And so I think that kind of potted knowledge and expertise all the way through the process, I think that must have been really important and pivotal to the products speaking for themselves for such a long period of time.
Yeah. What was important was listening, and when I co-authored the book with Mary Rose, she contacted. I didn't know her. She contacted me out of the blue from Lancaster University, and she asked me, could I be available for an interview, because she had been a textile historian for many years, doing a sort of business history books comparing the UK industry, the Lancaster industry largely, with the US industry. But she wanted to make a change. She was an outdoor person and wanted to do something different and refreshing. So she wanted to write about outdoor clothing and so on. And so I said, well, I've never written it. I've never done any writing like that. All I've done is write management memos. And she said, "Don't worry, I'm a good editor. I've edited 10 books before." So we set off. But also one of the things she did was go and do an interview with people I put her in touch with, which included Peter and Gordon at Berghaus, and Pete Hutchinson at Managing Equipment, and something like 4 or 5 of the major people and so on. Yeah. But I didn't tell her anything about those people on my relationship with them, which with Berghaus was highly competitive. And
yes, I think that's probably an understatement. Yeah.
And right now, I'm writing the memoir. I'm in touch with David Ugberg. Contacted me, and he says, "Look, you should include a chapter. This Karrimor Berghaus battle was really, really important, because it did actually animate and activate the whole trade, and everybody, the customers were benefited from that competition." I said, "Yeah, I can see the point." Anyway, those interviews that Mary did, she taped and she had them transcribed, but I never saw them.
Right.
This is going back 20 years, yeah? I never saw them until 3 months ago.
Oh, right.
Mary put the stories in and so on, but I didn't have time to look at them and read them. And so now, as I go back and listen to the interview of the Berghaus guys, because they started in a retail store.
Yes. Yeah, in Newcastle.
Yeah. And I went to see them and they wanted to take on the distribution of my products, and they were like interviewing me, and I was their supplier. Whoa. But I could see they were, I had to watch that they were going to be very competitive, even though they weren't trying to make anything at the time. But they never did become manufacturers in the sense that they remained in their shop office. Mm. And I know that I talked to the manufacturing director, and he said, we didn't see them. I didn't see them in like once every couple of weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
And but Gordon, was it no, it was Peter. Peter Lockie was a good climber. He used to climb with Paul Nunn in Bordeaux. And he also became one of the BMC guides before the international guides, yeah?
Yeah.
And as I look at the interview and read it, read the thing, he's saying, yeah, I was defensive of my designs, yeah? Because they were, and what was so interesting, it was really that after 50 years, quite amazing. And my strength was listening to the leading edge people.
Yeah.
Listening to Joe Brown, listening to Don Willans, listening to Dougal Haston, listening, yeah, and not assuming that I knew.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas Peter was very, by his own words, he was defensive of his own designs. And so that was one of the small things that kept me ahead in that period, including my hands-on approach.
Yeah.
Being able to make the patterns. I didn't continue making the patterns throughout the whole lifetime of the period eventually, but I was, for the first, until I think, when did I stop? I was careful. I got my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law became my pattern maker because I didn't want to teach anybody else.
Right, yeah, keep it in the family.
And that would not be until the 70s.
Right.
So I made all my own patterns through that, yeah.
All the way through to, yeah. So that put you in a perfect position in 1975, or it might even have been 1974, in the build-up to the Everest Southwest Face expedition, to work with the team to create bespoke equipment for that trip, I guess, didn't it? What were the sort of things you worked on?
Well, could we jump back a little bit, because basically Don was the equipment officer for, first of all, Annapurna.
Yes.
Yeah, and Chris on his 90th was interviewed by Niall Grimes at the BMC.
Yeah.
And asked what his favourite things that he still remembered, and he remembered his climbs in the Alps with Don, and said probably Don was the best mountaineer that Britain had ever produced, but bloody awkward to manage. Yeah.
There is actually a if you search deep on YouTube, there's a episode of This Is Your Life for Don Willans.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. There's a few famous faces on there.
Anyway, so he was popping in and out for, he'd come to collect a royalty check or something. And then one day he came in and said, you know that canvas you're making my pack out of? Yeah. He said, look, well, could you make me a tent out of that? If I made an angle iron frame, could you make me a tent out of that? I said, yeah. Well, you bring the frame up. So I made him something pretty basic, and he wanted that for Patagonia, because that's where his first idea came from. And in my memoir I'm talking about, I've got the original pictures from Chris. because he
Right.
said this story from Mornington. This story needs to be told. Yeah. So I got all Burlington's original pictures, and what Don did in Patagonia, he actually, the tent kept being blown down. So he eventually found some boxwood on the local farmstead and erected that halfway up, and they wrote on it Club Britannico members only, because they were competing against the Italians and so on. So I've got the picture showing that written on the doorway. So this is absolutely fantastic. And so what he wanted he went back again to Patagonia, of course, and so what he wanted was something to be reliable, and instead of having to trust to luck finding some scraps of wood and so on and so on. So that's what I made for him. And that was about mid-60s. And then comes Annapurna. Yeah, this is... By that time, curiously, Don had not responded, and he wouldn't update the pack.
Right.
And Graham Tyso was a good collaborator at the time. He kept saying, you need to update, you need to update. I said, yeah, but he's not responding. So Graham was in close contact with Dougal, and I went to Switzerland to see Dougal. But Don just didn't, he just carried on and so on. So comes Annapurna, which was an idea born out of the Eiger Direct in '66, which was quite a severe thing. Don didn't go on that. Don said, this is not a route, it's an obsession by Harlin.
Right.
Harlin was killed. But for Dougal, it was very real. And after that, Chris was reporting for the Telegraph or the Observer, Chris Bonington, and but also got involved a little bit in the climb because the Germans were competing against the Brits, it turned out. They all arrived at the same time. And stuff was pretty primitive. So Dougal's purple sack, which I created with him, was born out of the Eiger Direct climb. And so then we came to, that was '66. So we came now to Annapurna, and Don was asked by Bonington to be the equipment officer. So he came along and said, okay, that tent I made for thing, could you do one for Annapurna? I said, oh, well, they're going to be a bit heavy. He said, doesn't matter, as long as they're not heavier than a porter load. So he gave me very little instruction. I made all the aluminium frame, because by that time we were making aluminium pack frames, and I made the corner pieces. And I knew that people disliked a tunnel entrance because their feet got caught up in it. So I made an entrance at both ends. I made a big U-shaped zip one end, and if you've seen the one that was on display.
Yeah, there was one on display at the Everest exhibition in Reggae recently, wasn't there?
U-shaped zip one side.
Yeah.
And which, of course, as a zip, there could be problems there. Yeah. So you could shut that up completely and then just use the tunnel entrance and so on. So that was a fail-safe. But the actual canvas pulled around the frame and tensioned underneath, and then lined it with yellow Karrimor, which was starting to become famous at that time.
Yeah.
And the idea was that, and this was Don's genius.
Yeah.
He realised that you couldn't get a wedge-shaped tent in. It would be crushed by the spindrift and the snow coming down the slope. And the idea was that they dug in the tent and pushed it into a sort of a cavity there. And occasionally what they did also was put some tarpaulins and things up on the slopes, pinned up by some dead men, into the snow, just to help it off. But when we got to Everest was the next step. By that time, Chris tried Everest. The Germans tried it. John Clare, I'm just doing a story on him at the Alpine Club next week. John Clare was on the German Herrlichhofer climb in 72. Because the whole world was having a go. Everest was going to be the big prize by this time. Whoa, everybody wanted that for sure. Yeah.
But it got so popular. They got they announced the team on the 10 o'clock news. It was such big business.
Big news, literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah. Just let me finish off on the tent. And what happened was that I was driving home for listening to Radio 4, and headline news: Don Willens has not been accepted for Chris Bonington's 1975 expedition.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah.
And sometime after that, I said, "Hey, Chris, that was a tough call, wasn't it?" He said, "I didn't make that call. Dougal did. Dougal said, if that man's going, I'm out." So Dougal made the call. Yeah. So sadly, Don wasn't on it, but he was a genius and very, very practical, hands-on to solve. I mean, it was a genius to think that you could use a box tent to solve the Annapurna and Everest problems. Anyway, what happened was that Chris got Hamish McInnes involved. On that Everest 75 one, and there was some risk that in that case Chris had been monitoring from various expeditions what the snow depth, what the conditions were, and everything, and so on. So they realized that there could be places where there wasn't enough snow to dig out, and that would be a real problem.
Yeah.
So Hamish made a completely different design of frame, and he made it so that the outer struts that on the downward side were adjustable in length. So you could adjust it. You could put it in place on a slope without deep snow.
Yeah.
And therefore, there was a full platform inside it. Yeah.
And I think that's what made the difference.
With thing, and it was in stronger aluminium tubes, and Hamish made that, and I made the tent that covered it again.
Incredible. And you can read in the descriptions, how important it was for the team to sleep on a flat platform. And I think there's also a description at some point, because of condensation and cooking, they were sleeping on the carry mats, but they were also using them to insulate on the top to stop the condensation. And
also there was one other important change, sounding small, but the original Annapurna box tent was sort of specified in size by Don, who is rather less tall than Dougal. And so the 75 tents were made rather longer.
All right. And as a tallie, I can relate to that. Yeah, I'm 6'6", so I can understand that one. Blimey.
Sleeping with your feet out the tent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as well as the box tent was obviously extremely important for expeditions of that time, but you made the rucksacks as well, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I mean, what I meant. Yeah.
Oh, he's going in his cupboard again.
Yeah.
What's coming out?
what they wanted for the 75, they wanted some further modifications of the pack. The pack that Don had done actually for Annapurna wasn't that good. I redesigned it and it became a big commercial success as the Annapurna pack. Yeah. Yeah. However, the specification for the 75 pack was that they wanted some way to hold the oxygen bottle upright. So I made a pack with a sleeve on the inside that held the bottle upright. It wasn't flopping about. And also they were having problems with the exchange valve in freezing up. And so they wanted some way of holding the exchange valve inside the pack so that it wouldn't freeze up, it wouldn't be open to the air. And so this is one of the original packs. Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Oh, wow. So for those who are listening to the podcast, we are looking at a brilliant red canvas rucksack with Karrimor Everest 75 on the logo, with beige straps coming down the front with metal clasps, and very kind of rectangular pockets on the side. And then Mike's just holding it up, and what's that? There's something strange on the bottom of the side packet there.
So the pack is proved coated nylon, of course, regular.
Yeah.
But to hold the exchange valve at the bottom, there was a separate pouch there, and this was in windproof fabric, not coated. And then the exchange valve was, let me just phrase it a little bit further. The exchange valve was in that section there, and the tube supplying the oxygen came out of here, and you drew that up with a draw cord, yeah?
Right.
And that went on to the, the breathing mask on the face, yeah.
Oh, okay. And then, so it was critical that the fabric around that exchange device was windproof, but not coated, so that there was no buildup of condensation to create ice,
Correct.
basically.
Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome. Oh, what a treat to see an actual pack from the trip there. That's superb.
And then it's got, just back to what you were saying earlier about sort of redesigning packs for climbing. That one had like rigid poles on the back, didn't it? As well as the
by that time,
that's the word.
Come in.
Yeah.
In many cases, you see, once they got to a certain altitude, the number of Sherpas able to do that was limited, and so they needed something which was a good loading. So you've got a full. You got a full hip belt there.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And so at that time, this was before hip belts were had been designed into soft packs. Yeah. However, when I delved into details, you never know what actually is going to be used for sure on an expedition until you delve into things. So I said, Dougal wrote me a piece about them bivvying as they descended, highest bivvy ever. Yeah. And they used my yellow carry mats, and they survived that thing. And I still recall Dougal with Doug, coming down, and they had this overnight bivvy, and they were checking that we talked about creeping into action and checking their reactions, if they're sort of reactions, just throwing snowballs in the air just as they restarted, to see if their mobility and climbing reactions had been degraded with the lack of oxygen, you see.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I still remember that description, and Dougal
Gosh.
wrote that up for me, and I put that in the Karrimor catalogue. So that
Yeah.
sort of story in the Karrimor catalogue, I mean, you're asking me about what the domination was. Well, I had some terrific stories in the Karrimor catalogue.
Well,
It was a collector's piece, you know.
Yeah.
And so, however, when I delved further into Dougal's things, I found that he had customized or asked somebody to customize a soft pack for him with a sleeve in. Yeah, for certain parts of the route, he still wanted an alpinist. Yeah,
Right.
pack with a tube. we holding the upright thing, but until you ask the question, penetrate, you don't know for sure.
So he was adapting your designs on the go almost, basically, wasn't he?
Yeah,
on mounting.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
But working with leading climbers, you very often, many people didn't know really. They only knew what happened if there was a problem, but they didn't know how it had happened, and so on and so on. Yeah. And that was getting proper stories out of them for feedback was quite problematic. Yeah. But I just was good at asking questions.
And then translating it. Yeah. Translating that into the notes. So we're kind of we're zooming through time, but I know Wayne, you were really keen to just to hear a bit more about later in your career, Mike, when you collaborated with Dr. Mary Rose on it's an academic project to recreate the clothing worn by George Mallory, who went missing near the summit of Everest in 1924, I think it was. It was really, really early, wasn't it? Can you just very, very briefly sort of tell us, you kind of explained how it became possible and how you became involved, but what key elements did you learn from that project?
Okay, let me tell you first of all why it happened. During the period that Mary and I were writing and researching the book Invisible on Everest, the Mountain Heritage Trust was established, and it was set up at Reged, as you probably recall.
Yes.
And I said to Mary, this sounds important, I'm going to get involved, and so on, and see if I can help, and so on. So I did some of the writing of the boards, and I was helping the setup because we were still knocking nails in and doing all sorts of things. At 10 p.m. on the evening before, Tony Blair arrived to do the official opening. Yeah,
right.
And so only the evening before, the pieces had arrived back from Mallory's body, and so they just took out some key pieces, and one key piece was his name tag on his jacket that they put there, and some goggles. So that was very nice. So I said, "Oh, is there anything else?" They said, "Oh yeah, well, there's 3 boxes." Oh, so I went back the day afterwards, and there's 3 boxes, and I unscrewed them, and there's all these layers interleaved with tissue, but the original blood is still caked on there.
Oh gosh.
And I thought, oh, look, geez. However, at that moment, something clicked and connected, because when Mary wrote to me about collaborating on the book, she had quoted George Bernard Shaw in 1927, who said, the 1924 Everesters were dressed as though for a picnic in Connemara, but surprised by a snowstorm.
Right.
And Mary quoted that quote to me on an email. And I said, you know, I don't think that is correct. I don't have proof because I haven't had time or whatever. And she was very surprised by me as a manufacturer of modern equipment saying that. And so that was part of the thing that gelled us together. She's saying, oh, hang on, somebody different here. And so then several years, sometime later, as I'm opening the boxes, she's okay. On the phone to Mary. Mary, this is what I'm finding. Do you happen to know anybody who is in the business of restoring ancient textiles? She said, as a matter of fact, I do. And she was running a trust. I can't remember the name of it. It was a textile trust, I think, based on, it's a Passhold trust based on Ladybird and so on. And they used to discuss things, and she was chairing that. And she said, yes, one of the members of my trust is a researcher at a university department linked to Southampton, but based just north of there. I'll give her a call. This person was on study leave or something for a month, but nevertheless came along pretty soon and said, yeah, look, we deal with things much more difficult than that. So the problem was how to, this needed money. This is not going to be done for fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we put together a project, a proposal to the Heritage Lottery Fund, but they wouldn't provide 100%. So Mary had some funds within the Passhold thing, and she provided £3,000-5,000 or something like that, yeah. And the Heritage Lottery Fund provided 21,000, yeah. So the total cost was £25,000. And Mary did a brilliant job. I said, if you're ever she coordinated 5 universities, yeah, just amazing. It was all different skills.
Yeah.
And we had 2 pieces. Mary did a brilliant, like I said. If ever you wanted to exit from academic, you make a brilliant product manager, you know.
Well, I think we might actually have to come back and talk about, because the whole project is incredible start to finish.
Yeah, wow.
And we might actually have to come back and do a separate podcast on that specifically.
I think we do need
it's
to.
Absolutely
yeah.
fascinating. And I've been lucky enough to see the recreated suit, and my gosh, I mean, it is so tactile. The fibers are just beautiful. The amount of layering is absolutely fascinating.
And so when we tested, we did 2 tests. We had one guy got up to 25,000 feet, and he said, yeah, I would have been willing to summit. If the weather had been good, I would have been willing to summit in this outfit. And it was incredibly free and flexible and so on, super. And it was also tested at Loughborough University. And certainly it was equivalent to the sort of things you would use on a polar trip. What, of course, within those layers was lacking was down equipment, which was used for, mainly for overnights and things like that. Down, if you recall the guy who, George Finch, he had invented a down jacket in 1922.
Everybody laughed at him.
He was Australian and didn't get on with anybody, and they didn't get on with him, so they didn't invite him back again. But actually, he was a brilliant alpinist, probably better than Mallory. And so they missed the down jacket. And so my theory is that when George Finch did his talks in Germany and Paris, a rather important person called Pierre Alain,
Yeah,
famous
rock boot fame.
of rock boot fame and Fontainebleau fame. He was the instigator of Fontainebleau. I have a good bet that he heard Finch. And so when we came to Everest 53, the down equipment was French made because there wasn't yet any British makers of down.
Yeah. But 75, of course, Pete Hutchins and Mountain Equipment was
already there.
They had it covered.
Also, if you happen to be talking about Kanchenjunga, the Everest 53 had a absolutely brilliant piece of footwear, which was used again on Kanchenjunga and probably used by Joe, I'm sure.
Yes.
And it was forgotten about and never used again.
Oh, right. Really?
Completely forgotten. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was no market, there was no entrepreneurs involved and so on. It was a technical project by Griffith Pugh, the government scientist, and it was a brilliant boot. I have pictures of that boot and can give you a picture if you need it in comparison with the Mallory boot. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a date, Mike.
Definitely.
Because that's just fantastic. Oh, amazing. I mean, we can literally carry on and talk all day, but unfortunately we are very much out of time. But you can see a Joe Brown original Joe Brown Karrimor pack, which is on display permanently in our Capel Curig shop. And we do have at the moment a display of old, I think we've got old Jaguars, a Sac de Grand-Peur. We have an original Sac de Grand-Peur on display in our Ambleside shop, the Climbers shop. So please do come along. They're just up in the stairwell to go and see. You will find in the show notes links to Mike's book in association with Dr. Mary Rose, Invisible on Everest, which is all about the clothing and the project involving the Mallory clothes. And Mike, you're obviously working on a fascinating memoir at the moment, so be sure to check our website when because it will be there when it's available, and you can find that on www.climbers-shop.com. And there is also a wealth of additional information. There's also an article on the history of the Kanchenjunga 1955 expedition as well, that Joe Brown was part of, that Mike just mentioned. And that is available on our blog and also via our Joe Brown Outdoor Academy, which is www.joebrownoutdooracademy.com.